The other views. I am asking, what is the criterion of personal identity over time? What this identity involves or consists in? I first described the spatiotemporal physical continuity that, on the standard view, is the criterion of identity of physical objects. I then described two views about personal identity, the physical and psychological criteria. There is a natural but false assumption about these views. Many people believe in what is called materialism or physicalism. This is the view that there are no purely mental objects, states, or events. On one version of physicalism, every mental event is just a physical event in some particular brain and nervous system. There are other versions. Those who are not physicalists are either dualists or idealists. Dualists believe that mental events are not physical events. This can be so even if all mental events are causally dependent on physical events in a brain. Idealists believe that all states and events are, when understood correctly, purely mental. Given these distinctions, we may assume that physicalists must accept the physical criterion of personal identity. This is not so. Physicalists could accept the psychological criterion, and they could accept the version that allows any reliable cause or any cause. They could thus believe that, in simple teletransportation, my replica would be me. They would here be rejecting the physical criterion. These criteria are not the only views about personal identity. I shall now describe some of the other views that are either sufficiently plausible or have enough supporters to be worth considering. This description may be hard to follow, but it will give a rough idea of what lies ahead. If much of this summary seems either obscure or trivial, do not worry. I start with a new distinction. On the physical criterion, personal identity over time just involves the physically continuous existence of enough of a brain so that it remains the brain of a living person. On the psychological criterion, personal identity over time just involves the various kinds of psychological continuity with the right kind of cause. These views are both reductionist. They are reductionist because they claim 1. That the fact of a person's identity over time just consists in the holding of certain more particular facts. They may also claim 2. That these facts can be described without either presupposing the identity of this person or explicitly claiming that the experiences in this person's life are had by this person, or even explicitly claiming that this person exists. These facts can be described in an impersonal way. It may seem that 2 could not be true. When we describe the psychological continuity that unifies some person's mental life, we must mention this person and many other people in describing the content of many thoughts, desires, intentions, and other mental states. But mentioning this person in this way does not involve either asserting that these mental states are had by this person or asserting that this person exists. These claims need further arguments, which I shall later give. Our view is non-reductionist if we reject both of the two reductionist claims. Many non-reductionists believe that we are separately existing entities. On this view, personal identity over time does not just consist in physical and/or psychological continuity. It involves a further fact. A person is a separately existing entity, distinct from his brain and body and his experiences. On the best known version of this view, a person is a purely mental entity, a Cartesian pure ego or spiritual substance. But we might believe that a person is a separately existing physical entity of a kind that is not yet recognized in the theories of contemporary physics. There is another non-reductionist view. This view denies that we are separately existing entities, distinct from our brains and bodies and our experiences. But this view claims that though we are not separately existing entities, personal identity is a further fact, which does not just consist in physical and/or psychological continuity. I call this the further fact view. I shall now draw some more distinctions. The physical and psychological criteria are versions of the reductionist view, and there are different versions of each criterion. But what is necessarily involved in a person's continued existence is less than what is in fact involved. So, while believers in the different criteria disagree about imaginary cases, they agree about what is in fact involved in the continued existence of most actual people. They would start to disagree only if, for example, people began to be teletransported. On the reductionist view, each person's existence just involves the existence of a brain and body, the doing of certain deeds, the thinking of certain thoughts, the occurrence of certain experiences, and so on. It will help to extend the ordinary sense of the word event. I shall use this word to cover even such boring events as the continued existence of a belief or a desire. This use makes the reductionist view simpler to describe, and it avoids what I believe to be one misleading implication of the words mental state. While a state must be a state of some entity, this is not true of an event. Given this extended use of the word event, all reductionists would accept 3. A person's existence just consists in the existence of a brain and body, in the occurrence of a series of interrelated physical and mental events. Some reductionists claim 4. A person just is a particular brain and body and such a series of interrelated events. Other reductionists claim 5. A person is an entity that is distinct from a brain and body and such a series of events. On this version of the reductionist view, a person is not merely a composite object with these various components. A person is an identity that has a brain and body and has particular thoughts, desires, and so on. But though 5 is true, a person is not a separately existing entity. Though 5 is true, 3 is also true. This version of reductionism may seem self-contradictory. 3 and 5 may seem to be inconsistent. It may help to consider Hume's analogy. I cannot compare the soul more properly to anything than to a republic or commonwealth. Most of us are reductionists about nations. We would accept the following claims. Nations exist. Ruritania does not exist, but France does. Though nations exist, a nation is not an entity that exists separately, apart from its citizens and its territory. We would accept 6. A nation's existence just involves the existence of its citizens living together in certain ways on its territory. Some claim, 7, a nation just is these citizens and this territory. Others claim a nation is an identity that is distinct from these citizens and this territory. For reasons that I give in Appendix D, we may believe that 6 and 8 are not inconsistent. If we believe this, we may accept that there is no inconsistency between the corresponding claims 3 and 5. We may thus agree that the version of reductionism expressed in 3 and 5 is a consistent view. If this version is consistent, as I believe, it is the better version. It stays closer to our actual concept of a person. But in most of what follows, we can ignore the difference between these two versions. Besides claiming 1 and 2, reductionists might also claim, though persons exist, we could give a complete description of reality without claiming that persons exist. I call this the view that a complete description could be impersonal. This view may also seem to be self-contradictory. If persons exist, and a description of what exists fails to mention persons, how can this description be complete? A reductionist could give the following reply. Suppose that an object has 2 names. This is true of the planet that is called both Venus and the evening star. In our description of what exists, we could claim that Venus exists. Our description could then be complete, even though we do not claim that the evening star exists. We need not make this claim because, using its other name, we have already claimed that this object exists. A similar claim applies when some fact can be described in some ways. Some reductionists accept 4, the claim that a person just is a particular brain and body and a series of interrelated physical and mental events. If this is what a person is, we can describe this fact by claiming either 10, that there exists a particular brain and body and a particular series of interrelated physical and mental events, or 11, that a particular person exists. If 10 and 11 are 2 ways of describing the same fact, a complete description need not make both claims. It would be enough to make claim 10. Though this person exists, a complete description need not claim that he exists, since this fact has already been reported in claim 10. Other reductionists accept 5, the claim that a person is distinct from his brain and body, and his acts, thoughts, and other physical and mental events. On this version of reductionism, claim 10 does not describe the very same fact that claim 11 describes. But claim 10 may imply claim 11. More cautiously, given our understanding of the concept of a person, if we know that 10 is true, we shall know that 11 is true. These reductionists can say that if our description of reality either states or implies or enables us to know about the existence of everything that exists, our description is complete. This claim is not as clearly true as the claim that a complete description need not give 2 descriptions of the same fact. But this claim seems plausible. If it is justified, and the reductionist view is true, these reductionists can completely describe reality without claiming that persons exist. My claims about reductionism draw distinctions that, in this abstract form, are hard to grasp. But there are other ways of discovering whether we are reductionists in our way of thinking about something. If we accept a reductionist view, we shall believe that the identity of such a thing may be, in a quite unpuzzling way, indeterminate. If we do not believe this, we are probably non-reductionists about this kind of thing. Consider, for example, clubs. Suppose that a certain club exists for several years, holding regular meetings. The meetings then cease. Some years later, some of the members of this club form a club with the same name and the same rules. We ask, have these people reconvened the very same club? Or have they merely started up another club, which is exactly similar? There might be an answer to this question. The original club might have had a rule explaining how, after such a period of non-existence, it could be reconvened. Or it might have had a rule preventing this. But suppose that there is no such rule and no legal facts supporting either answer to our question. And suppose that the people involved, if they asked our question, would not give it an answer. There would then be no answer to our question. The claim, "This is the same club," would be neither true nor false. Though there is no answer to our question, there may be nothing that we do not know. This is because the existence of a club is not separate from the existence of its members, acting together in certain ways. The continued existence of a club just involves its members having meetings that are conducted according to the club's rules. If we know all the facts about how people held meetings and about the club's rules, we know everything there is to know. This is why we would not be puzzled when we cannot answer the question, "Is this the very same club?" We would not be puzzled because, even without answering this question, we can know everything about what happened. If this is true of some question, I call this question empty. When we ask an empty question, there is only one fact or outcome that we are considering. Different answers to our question are merely different descriptions of this fact or outcome. This is why, without answering this empty question, we can know everything that there is to know. In my example, we can ask, is this the very same club, or is it merely another club that is exactly similar? But these are not, here, two different possibilities, one of which alone must be true. When an empty question has no answer, we can decide to give it an answer. We could decide to call the later club the same as the original club. Or we could decide to call it another club that is exactly similar. This is not a decision between different views about what really happened. Before making our decision, we already knew what happened. We are merely choosing one of two different descriptions of the very same course of events. If we are reductionists about personal identity, we should make similar claims. We can describe cases where, between me now and some future person, the physical and psychological connections hold only to reduced degrees. If I imagine myself in such a case, I can always ask, am I about to die? Will the resulting person be me? On the reductionist view, in some cases, there would be no answer. My question would be empty. The claim that I was about to die would be neither true nor false. If I knew the facts about both physical continuity and psychological connectedness, I would know everything that there was to know. I would know everything, even though I did not know whether I was about to die or would go on living for many years. When it is applied to ourselves, this reductionist claim is hard to believe. In such imagined cases, something unusual is about to happen. But most of us are inclined to believe that in any conceivable case, the question, "Am I about to die?" must have an answer. And we are inclined to believe that this answer must be either, and quite simply, yes or no. Any future person must be either me or someone else. These beliefs I call the view that our identity must be determinate. I shall next describe two explanatory claims. The first answers a new question. What unites the different experiences that are had by a single person at the same time? While I type this sentence, I am aware of the movements of my fingers and can see the sunlight on my desk and can hear the wind ruffling some leaves. What unites these different experiences? Some claim the fact that they are all my experiences. These are the experiences that are being had at this time by a particular person or subject of experiences. A similar question covers my whole life. What unites the different experiences that together constitute this life? Some give the same answer. What unites all these experiences is simply that they are all mine. These answers I call the view that psychological unity is explained by ownership. The views described so far are about the nature of personal identity. I shall end with a pair of views that are about not the nature of this identity, but its importance. Consider an ordinary case where, even on any version of the reductionist view, there are two possible outcomes. In one of the outcomes, I am about to die. In the other outcome, I shall live for many years. If these years would be worth living, the second outcome would be better for me. And the differences between these outcomes would be judged to be important on most theories about rationality and most moral theories. It would have rational and moral significance whether I am about to die or shall live for many years. What is judged to be important here is whether during these years there will be someone living who will be me. This is a question about personal identity. On one view, in this kind of case, this is always what is important. I call this the view that personal identity is what matters. This is the natural view. The rival view is that personal identity is not what matters. I claim what matters is relation R, psychological connectedness and or continuity with the right kind of cause. Since it is more controversial, I add as a separate claim, in an account of what matters, the right kind of cause could be any cause. It is in imaginary cases that we can best decide whether what matters is relation R or personal identity. One example may be the branch line case, where my life briefly overlaps with that of my replica. Suppose that we believe that I and my replica are two different people. I am about to die, but my replica will live for another 40 years. If personal identity is what matters. I should regard my prospect here as being nearly as bad as ordinary death. But if what matters is relation R with any cause, I should regard this way of dying as being about as good as ordinary survival. The disagreement about these views and between these views is not confined to imaginary cases. The two views also disagree about all of the actual lives that are lived. The disagreement is here less sharp because, on both views, all or nearly all these lives contain the relation that matters. On all the plausible views about the nature of personal identity nearly always coincides with psychological continuity and roughly coincides with psychological connectedness. But, as I shall argue later, it makes a great difference which of these we believe to be what matters. If we cease to believe that our identity is what matters, this may affect some of our emotions, such as our attitude to aging and to death. And, as I shall argue, we may be led to change our views about both rationality and morality. I have now given a first description of several different views. Stated in this abstract way, this description cannot be wholly clear. But what is now obscure may, when I discuss these views, become clear. How are these views related to each other? I shall claim what some deny, that many of these views stand or fall together. If this is so, it will be easier to decide what the truth is. When we see how these views are related, we shall find, I believe, that we have only two alternatives. It is worth stating in advance some of the ways in which, as I shall argue, these views are related. If we do not believe that we are separately existing entities, can we defensively believe that personal identity is what matters? Some writers think we can. I shall argue that we cannot. If we do not believe that we are separately existing entities, can we defensively believe that personal identity does not just consist in physical and psychological continuity, but is a further fact? I believe that we cannot. If we believe that our identity must be determinate, must we believe that we are separately existing entities? Having the first belief does not imply having the second. We might believe both, that we are not separately existing entities, and that, to any question about personal identity, there must always be an answer, which must be either yes or no. There are some writers who accept this view, but I shall argue that this view is indefensible. Only if we are separately existing entities can it be true that our identity must be determinate. It would be possible to claim that we are separately existing entities, but deny that our identity must be determinate. But there are few people who would combine these claims. Suppose next that we believe that psychological unity is explained by ownership. We believe that the unity of a person's consciousness at any time is explained by the fact that this person's different experiences are all being had by this person. And we believe that the unity of a person's whole life is explained by the fact that all of the experiences in this life are had by this person. These are the explanations given by those who claim that we are separately existing entities. Can we give these explanations if we reject that claim? Some writers suggest that we can, but I shall argue that we cannot. I shall also argue for the following conclusions. 1. We are not separately existing entities apart from our brains and bodies in various interrelated physical and mental events. Our existence just involves the existence of our brains and bodies, and the doing of our deeds, and the thinking of our thoughts, and the occurrence of certain other physical and mental events. Our identity over time just involves A. Relation R, physical connectedness and/or physical continuity with the right kind of cause, provided B. that this relation does not take a branching form, holding between one person and two different future people. 2. It is not true that our identity is always determinate. I can always ask, am I about to die? But it is not true that, in every case, this question must have an answer, which must be either yes or no. In some cases, this would be an empty question. 3. There are two unities to be explained: the unity of consciousness at any time, and the unity of a whole life. These two unities cannot be explained by claiming that different experiences are had by the same person. These unities must be explained by describing the relations between these many experiences and their relations to this person's brain. And we can refer to these experiences and fully describe the relations between them without claiming that these experiences are had by a person. 4. Personal identity is not what matters. What fundamentally matters is relation R with any cause. This relation is what matters even when, as in a case where one person is R related to two other people, relation R does not provide personal identity. Two other relations may have some slight importance: physical continuity and physical similarity, in the case of some people, such as those who are very beautiful. Physical similarity may have great importance. Here is a brief sketch of how I shall argue for my conclusions. I shall first try to answer some objections to my claim that we could describe our lives in an impersonal way. I shall then try to show that even if we are not aware of this, we are naturally inclined to believe that our identity must always be determinate. We are inclined to believe strongly that this must be so. I shall next argue that this natural belief cannot be true unless we are separately existing entities. I shall then argue for conclusion 1 that we are not such entities. And I shall argue that because 1 is true, so are my other 3 conclusions. Most of us would accept some of the claims that I shall be denying. I shall thus be arguing that most of us have a false view about ourselves and about our actual lives. If we come to see that this view is false, this may make a difference to our lives.